That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I am very happy to be joined by my next guest. She has a YouTube channel that you should check out, and she also writes regularly for Human Events and the Post Millennial. Please give it up for Sarah Higdon.
Yes,
did I get Higdon right?
Yeah, you got it right. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was I was excited when you asked me to come on, so I'm excited for this.
Very cool. First off, Higdon, where's that from?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
It's a pretty rare, uncommon name.
Yeah.
And so I think it's English, but most of my heritage comes from Poland and Ireland. So
it has that like what's his name? Oh my God, now I'm forgetting it. He wrote A Christmas Carol. He wrote Dickens. It has like a Dickens feel to it, you know.
Yeah.
So you know, I think you and I, we've been following each other's work for a little while. I remember some months back, you and I were both published in Human Events, and our mutual friend Eliza Blue was also published there, and there was some controversy there. I don't know if you remember it, because I think somebody had reached out to Jack Posaic about like what's the deal having like a trans person writing for Human Events. And we didn't know each other at the time, but in that little back and forth on Twitter, I'm like, oh well, I got to check out Sarah's work. So so here, what was your response like? You know, hearing that, your reaction to that?
Well, you know, all these ultra right conservatives, they always are so worried about, you know, trans people doing stuff and conservatives actually embracing them. And it is funny, yeah, because when they reached out to Jack Posobiec, Jack's like, I don't care. It's like, and all they end up doing is, like you said, like exactly what they did for you is they put my work out there. So every time I've been canceled, I just gain followers because that's the first time people have heard of me, and they're like, oh wait, Sarah's actually saying this. That's pretty cool, you know. And I give Human Events a lot of, you know, I think Eliza actually said it at the time, is like Human Events has been publishing liberty activists for a little while now, and so they're great over there. And obviously now Libby Emmons has taken over, and Libby's a friend of mine, and so I've been working for the Post Millennial and Human Events pretty regularly. So it's been good.
That's great. Yeah, I love Libby. She was a guest of a little while back. That was a lot of fun. We spent the whole time geeking out on like theater stuff and all that. But you know, there's something about I mean, this is going to sound like pretty like I'm not really saying anything, but I enjoy reading the opinions of interesting people, in that people who you know, they're going to surprise you if you just take them on face value, you know.
Yeah.
So like yourself, you're trans, you're libertarian, you're also Catholic. And I know all that, I think, because that's like your Twitter, your Twitter bio.
That's my Twitter bio.
So you're leading with all these things where I'm like, wait a minute, this human being exists? How did this happen? But you know, maybe we could talk a little bit about, well, like, is it weird, like you know, being like a trans person where every time you talk, you end up being kind of like a spokesperson for the trans movement? Like that's what people want to talk about, like off the bat.
Yeah, because the thing is I got into this mostly. I've always been involved in or interested in politics and stuff like that. So that's really where a lot of my passions lied. But now, because the trans issue has become so prominent on everybody's tongue, that's all it seems like I talk about. And it's like the last thing I want to talk about, because it's probably the least interesting thing about me, you know. It's like I am just a normal person that likes to have so much fun. And it's always interesting because I love coming on shows like this and everything like that, because it really starts to show like what my personality is. Like on my show, everything seems so serious because I'm fighting against a evil ideology, in my opinion. But when I come on other shows, I can, you know, let my hair down and just have a little fun. And it really starts to show like who I am, because like I said, I mean, that's like the least interesting thing about me. Conservatives are interested because, yeah, I'm a veteran too. I served 7.5 years in the Army, and my story goes way back. Like I spoke at the Libertarian Party's anti-war rally a couple months ago, back in February. And that's one thing that people don't really understand about me. It's how I went from being a veteran, like serving in 7.5 years in the Army, to now being very much anti-war and against, interventionism around the world. How I went from being a neocon to a libertarian.
Well, I guess fighting in a war will actually do that to you, right?
Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
does.
Okay.
And that's really what it was. Well, I served in Afghanistan in 2013. And then it was actually the military taught me to see big picture foreign policy. And that was like, I was like, wait a second. The Iraq war was a lie, but it was a lie not because of oil and not because of weapons of mass destruction, but because of Iran is in the middle of Afghanistan and Iraq. And so I realized, then I looked back and started again going through Ron Paul, because I loved Ron Paul, but couldn't get past his foreign policy. And I was like, wait a second. Ron Paul was right. We've destabilized this region, and we kind of done all of this. The only reason why we're there is because of stuff that we've done in the past that has completely destabilized this region. But yeah, I mean, so I like talking about a lot of different stuff, but it seems like, yeah, I am the spokesperson for, kind of the more rational trans people at this point in time.
What were you out when you were serving in Afghanistan? Were you,
No.
No?
No, my story, I actually didn't come out until 2014. So I served from 2010 to 2017, I was in the Army. I came out to the first person in 2014, but I didn't actually start transitioning until 2019.
Wow. And yeah, what's that like? I mean, it's so wild. Just, I mean, when you think of like soldier, you think of Army, you just think of like testosterone overload. And then to start transitioning, from what does that entail? Like, I know very little about, especially the medical side of this stuff. Like, what does transitioning mean,
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me, what most people don't realize is that throughout history, it's kind of been shown that more trans people serve in the military than are in our general population, but more under the guise of like being hidden, right? Or being in the closet. And I think part of that has to do with wanting to join this hyper masculinized field to try to suppress who you are, to try to suppress these feelings that you're having. And so when you get out, it's really interesting because that's the only secret I've ever kept my entire life. And so when I came out to my family, I basically felt free. Like I was like, it was living with no secrets and not having that anxiety was freeing. And I think the biggest thing too is I'm still pretty much the same person as I was then. I'm just more feminine. And yeah, so in 2019, I started living full time, and I started taking hormones, which that changes a lot. It feminizes the body, it feminizes the face, but it really takes a couple of years before you really even see the biggest effects of hormones and stuff. And yeah, and then some people have surgeries and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I've been getting back to working out. Okay, so in a way, I'm transitioning back into like a more testosterone. I'm trying to get some more testosterone. I have 2 kids, and I know that they say that like men's testosterone levels like kind of drop like when you have kids, because I guess it's like there's an evolutionary thing about being it's better to be a little bit more caring than a Neanderthal or something like that. But something that I noticed right away of getting back to working out is not only the effects like on my body, but also on my mind too, on my emotions.
Yeah.
I feel a lot better, both mentally and bodily, and I think a lot of that has to do with pumping up the testosterone levels. So when you go in reverse, like what are some things that you noticed like, off the bat?
Yeah, so that was the crazy thing that I didn't really know and didn't really expect. So when I started blocking testosterone and taking estrogen, it was really crazy. So I was having all these emotions that I didn't know what to do with. Like my body, I felt like I was going crazy for a little while. Like for a couple months, my body was not used to this and I was not used to it. So I really did. I felt like I was going crazy. Like I was doing things that I wouldn't normally do. And then it just like I was then just really emotional all the time. And then I started to get used to it. But then a year later, I started on progesterone and it was the same thing. And if I actually, one of my friends who was pregnant, she's like, it sounds like you have pregnancy brain. And I mean, because that's what progesterone is, the pregnancy, like it spikes during pregnancy. And so that's what kind of causes it. And so what I really attribute it to is my body ended up starting to get used to it. Whereas a biological female, their progesterone goes up and down through the month. And so that's what causes different mood swings during the month. And that's why you see so many hormonal things in biological females during the month, because their body never has a chance to just completely get used to the hormones because it's not at the same elevated state all the time where mine are now. And so I'm used to it. And I just realized I probably just got canceled by all the red femmes out there right now.
Right. Well, no, but it's really interesting. It's really interesting because, I think there's been so much emphasis on the idea of, social constructs. And, granted, when it comes to, outward displays of gender, it's like, why is it that, women, it's, wore dresses and men didn't, or maybe men wore kilts, or, there's stuff like that. It's like, okay, I can understand, the arguments over, well, blue wasn't always a boy color. It was at one time a girl color, and pink was a boy color. Okay, fine. But like just, from your own like experimentation with your body, the immense differences between that hormones have on people, so it's sort of like, it's really, breaking it down to the biological elements, of this stuff that are real and just can't be just brushed away.
Oh yeah. And that's, like you said, I actually, when I first started, I started a Medium channel pretty early on. I actually look back at some of the writings that I had, and it was like the difference between men and women, a trans perspective, because I was going through this process that I was like, wait a second, all this stuff is changing. And so I have a very unique perspective as to what each side, because based off of hormones, what starts to happen. And it is interesting because you were talking about working out earlier. I'm the same way. I'm back in the gym. I've been in the gym for a couple of years. And when we talk about like trans and sports issues, that gives me a unique perspective on trans and sports, because I've always been an athlete. And then I don't think that trans women should compete in female sports because there's no advantage that I have ever been able to raise simply by being on testosterone or on estrogen alone. And so it is really interesting. And so and the gym is probably what keeps me sane. What I realized is your body produces testosterone in the adrenal glands. And so that's what kind of helps boost your mood a little bit as well too. The adrenaline helps with mood stability. I mean, I was on Lexapro for a little while, and I traded the Lexapro in for a gym membership and Delta 8 for situational anxiety. So again, another thing that I'm passionate about that most people don't realize is cannabis activism and stuff like that, and alternate medicines.
Yeah, you're such a libertarian. You're such a Ron Paul libertarian. So you bring up Lexapro, and I think that was something around the time of my book coming out. I was super stressed out, unreal, just not taking care of myself, not exercising, not eating right. And it's sort of like any free time that I had when I wasn't working was just spent on worrying about my future and my family. And it was just instead of doing an hour in the gym every day, I was doing an hour of anxiety every day, which is fucking awful for you. And I go to I've been seeing my therapist for, oh man, a really really long time now. And it got to the point where I was just so down, where I was saying, I'm willing to try, anything that'll help. And we started talking about things like Lexapro and all that. And and obviously with something like that, you don't just dive into it. You want to see another, see other doctors and that sort of thing. But it was sort of like when I established for myself that I had a problem, and that all of these previous behaviors that I had that were positive, that I wasn't doing them anymore. It was like, well, let's see what happens if I go back to doing them. Let's see what happens if I actually take the time to eat better, exercise. And I'm thankful to say that it's worked tremendously, and that I'm not on anything. And this isn't putting anybody down who is on stuff, because I have family members who have been helped out big time. Picking up where we left off, I think I was talking about how I almost started going on, I don't know if they're considered antidepressants or something along that, in a similar family. But instead I ended up dieting better, working out, and fortunately for me, I don't have to take that. So I think that's where we are. Where do we go from there?
I think it was. So it's interesting because, well, that's the thing, is I have friends that are on antidepressants, and if it works for you, great. But even the ones that I have that are on them would like to try something else, right? Like, they've shown promise in like LSD psychotherapy and stuff like that, to where you take LSD with a doctor and they guide you through it. And so there's those types of experimentation out there. And I think actually Thomas Massey put up a bill in Congress with Cory Booker, so a bipartisan bill, to allow for to expand the Right to Try Act. So you can try any experimental treatment because it's your body, your choice type stuff.
And I mean, you being a veteran, I mean, this must be, really, close to you, because, the stuff that you've probably seen, personally, but also your, those who you fought with alongside, excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot out there that says some of the stuff could be more almost cures for PTSD. So it is something that I do follow very closely. And I will tell you too, like, I didn't even realize how much, my emotional support animal, my dog, helps me out. She went missing last week, and I couldn't deal. Like, it was a wreck. So at the most, it's like at the worst point, I needed my dog, but that's the whole reason why I wasn't feeling, I was depressed, was because my dog was gone. And I'm like, so it's amazing how much, support we need. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the terms of, big pharma medications, though.
Yeah. There was one time I was in Brooklyn and waiting to be sat at a restaurant, and in the bar area, a guy came in with not one but two just giant, like really big yellow labs, and they're like, "Sir, you can't bring the dogs in." He's like, "They're my support animals." And I was just thinking, like, how fucked up it is that this guy has two support animals. It seemed a little bullshitty. Like, it seemed like, because I was like, I don't know, if you need two, like, maybe you're not the best person to be raising these dogs. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe one's enough, because that means that one's not actually doing its job. They're probably not paying attention to you, right?
Right. Yeah. They're trying to hook up or something, like make little yellow labs and all that. But so we were talking about exercising, promoting that, and also how that relates to trans women in sports now and competing. So maybe we could talk a little more about that, because some of the stuff I think is a little wild. I remember a friend of mine shared with me an article about a trans woman who I think it only like transitioned like maybe like a year or two, and was competing in women's mixed martial arts. Mm-hmm. And my friend pointed out, he said, it's a little fucked up, like, where it's like, you go through like all this transitioning and like the first thing you want to do is like get in there in a cage and fight women. Like it's a little much, it's like, I don't know what other demons you're trying to work out,
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, because why would you want to? Why would you want to go fight women? Like you just it's like the most masculine thing you can do is to go, step in a ring and fight, and and you just came from that area. And actually it's interesting because the last fighter, the MMA fighter, I forget what her name was off the top of my head. It wasn't Fallon Fox was the first, but there was another one who was a former Green Beret and stepped in the ring to fight. And what's really interesting about like combat sports, obviously with like MMA, like especially professional, like the women have to accept the fight, but they're pressured to accept the fight. Like if they don't accept this fight, they could lose like their ride, they could lose their card, to be able to fight more. So it's like almost like they have to accept the fight. But that person fought, I think, one big fight, and I don't think they've fought since. But it's always been a big controversy. It doesn't make any sense. And and just being on, estrogen for a year, it doesn't do enough to even move the needle when it comes to erasing a biological advantage that you have by going through male puberty.
Yeah. Like, has anybody pinpointed like the amount of time that one needs to be on estrogen or the other hormones to, completely dial back any of the advantages of going through male puberty?
Well, according to a study that the UK did back in 2021, there is no amount of time. You can never erase the biological advantage. I mean, think about this. It's you don't reduce your bone density. You don't reduce your lung capacity. You don't change like your hip angles and all that stuff. So there is like there's no amount of time that you can take that would actually erase that. It would only be if you were talking about like if you started going through puberty at 13 and then started transitioning in at 16, that maybe you could, but I mean, that's not ethical either. So I don't support kids transitioning at that point. So I don't think that males should ever compete in female sports.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is wild just how much focus is on it now, like how much it's happening. And I hear, quite a few, critics will say, or critics of one side of it will say, well, it's not happening that much, so you shouldn't care about it. But then it's like, well, if it isn't happening that much, then you shouldn't care about it. And, what would stopping it, make a difference?
I mean, I think it would. I mean, the issue is, especially when it comes to a lot of the like Title IX sports, so like school sports, like you're talking about taking away scholarships away from biological females, which is one of the big issues. And I don't know when the Title IX, when they stop hearing comments about the change of the Title IX, but if you the Defense of Freedom Institute, they have a link on their website to go and voice your opinion on that. But it's really bad, because you're taking away spots away from female athletes. And it's kind of the same thing as, we're banning childhood transitions all around the country, and the activists will say, it's not happening. And then you say, well, if it's not happening, then why do you care if we ban it? And then they're like, well, because it's happening.
Yeah.
It's life-saving. So it's like, it's not. And so we can get kids to adulthood before they transition. And I mean, if you remember, the women's national soccer team lost to a U15 boys team. And so that's how fast, people like males gain an advantage over females.
Yeah, I think when it comes to something like track also, it's like the world record that's held by like, women is just, like thousands of boys every year just, completely demolish it. Yeah, it's the first time that I ever had like sort of an in-depth discussion about a lot of this stuff was with a woman named Exu Lancic. Do you know Exu Lancic? Her real first name is Sierra, but she's
ring a bell.
she covers a lot of this stuff. And one thing in particular, I didn't know about it, but it was the show I Am Jazz.
Yeah.
And from what I've seen of that show, I guess clips of the show, it's like, wait, I thought this wasn't happening. I thought they didn't do this to kids, and then you have this prime example of a child who has gone through just, so much, medical, transitioning. And a really, creepy part is, I guess, her mother. Her mother's a real, just the stuff that comes out of this woman's mouth. But yeah,
She's fully a Transhausen mommy. So Transhausen by proxy.
Oh my God. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
It's one of those things you're like, oh my God, it sounds funny, but you're like, oh man, that could actually be real. Like, oh shit, that might be real.
So like even Jazz is the prime example of this, where she was basically transitioned at a very young age, socially transitioned very young, and went through the whole process from a very young age, like basically being pushed. And then once they put cameras in front of her face, now that's the problem, is she's done this on camera. And so once they start putting cameras on her face, that makes it even worse. And I think one of the first articles I wrote in Human Events was about the sunk cost fallacy when it comes to transitioning, and how hard it is to like go again, like when you know something's wrong for you, but you keep going in that that investment, because to turn away the alternative is very difficult to do. And so when your parents have basically indoctrinated you from a very young age, that this is who you are, then it's hard for you to turn away. But now you're starting to see Jazz, with all the complications that Jazz has had from surgery, should turn anybody away from transitioning young. But as well, like Jazz is saying, I don't feel like myself. I just want to be myself. And it's like, wait, like that kind of sounds like this was never your choice. Yeah. There's also a lot of moms on the left. I think we see this right now, where it's a lot of, upper middle class white progressive women who are transitioning their kids for woke points, because they've been told so much now that they are an oppressor simply by being white and upper middle class. They are oppressive. And so the worst thing you can be is an oppressor in this society. And so that they go and they transition their kids. And now they're saying, look at how good of a mom I am. I have a trans child. So they basically get the oppression points through proxy.
Oh my God. It's so crazy. And yet it sounds it's real. It really does sound. Yeah. It's like, I could imagine that scene where it's like, your kid, you pick up your kid from kindergarten and mommy's a little drunk on some afternoon Chardonnay. And she's like, what could really help me right now, just get in with all the ladies in the neighborhood, is if you just became a girl. Like if you could just, do that. That's so wild. In your case, do you wish that you had like transitioned earlier? Like, do you wish that had been an option for you? Like, did you have those thoughts as a kid?
Oh yeah. So that's what I mean. I lived with this my whole life, so I knew something was different around the age of 4. I had, there was something that I was drawn to. I always wanted to know what it was like to be a girl. I knew I wasn't a girl. That's the whole difference. What we're telling people nowadays is you're a girl trapped in a boy's body, but that's not the case. I mean, I knew I wasn't a girl. I just wanted to know what it was like. And so I had these feelings that I was uncomfortable with who I was most of my life. And puberty was very confusing because I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I grew up in the 90s. So it was like I'm bisexual, so I was envious of girls, but I wanted to date girls, and so I didn't know what was going on. And so I just grew up. But in terms of would I want to transition young? No, I don't think I would. And see, this is, I guess I just don't think like that, because I'm a person, I literally try to live with zero regrets in my life, because everything that's happened has led me to where I am now. And actually, I was speaking at an event recently, and I said, I think somebody asked me the same question. I said, I think obviously you said I'm Catholic. I believe God put me in this position to be exactly where I am now, to be fighting against this ideology, and making a difference in the world. And I don't think transitioning young it could have put me in a different mindset, as to where it was. And so I actually have a tattoo that says, only look back to see how far you've come, focus on what's ahead. So I never really look at things in terms of would I want to transition young, because I've lived such a good life. I don't think I would,
Well, I also wondered just how much, you would have missed out by like transitioning young. So
Yeah.
I mean, so that's one of the, some of the horrors that you hear about kids who are transitioned young, or things like sterility, the inability to achieve an orgasm later in life. In the case of, Jazz and, other, kids, when your penis hasn't been allowed to grow enough, and you get, if you are to get, bottom surgery, the artificial vagina being too shallow, it's just like all these things are like, wait a minute, you don't hear about all that stuff that people are going to have to deal with if they go this route, so
yeah.
Like in a way, it's sort of like as confusing and weird, and and I know you've had some trials and tribulations. It's like, but you have those sensations, like your body was allowed to to develop.
No, you're absolutely right. So that's one of the things that we're starting to find out even more and more about this is, like you said, Marcy Bowers, who's the president of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, is also a Jazz Jennings surgeon, has talked about how she's not a fan of like using puberty blockers, even though she says that they are, they might be medical necessary in the most extreme cases. But that is the issue, is she's the one that has basically now said that 100% of the time, if they've been blocked, if they've had puberty blockers before they hit Tanner stage 2, they will never achieve orgasm as an adult. And you're just looking at that going, you're literally saying kids can consent to something that they have never experienced, nor should they have ever experienced in their life. So they don't even know what they're giving up.
Right.
And then recently it was a story I'd never even heard about. It was kind of hidden, is one of the children died in 2016 from complications from a vaginoplasty, because they were part of the original Dutch protocol study that basically is what they use as the gold standard. You take puberty blockers until 16, and then you have surgery. Then you take cross-sex hormones until 18, then you have surgery. This kid had surgery at 18 and ended up dying because of a flesh-eating like cellulitis, because they had to use parts of the colon to create the rest of the neovagina, which caused an E. coli infection, and the person died a couple days after surgery. And it's like when you think about it, if you are able to grow into an adult, you have enough tissue, you have all, and you've had all those sensations, and then you also have time to be able to, store sperm if you ever want to have kids or anything like that. And so it just gives you time to think about it even more, especially when we know that 20% are growing out of it by the age of 20, or 80% are growing out of it by the age of 20. So
yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about like when I was a kid, like going through puberty. I remember who was my, and for the first time, like jerking off and orgasming, like what is this like this is the most unreal thing I've ever felt in my life, and I want to do this as much as I can. And I remember like a buddy of mine was like, yeah, if you keep doing it, if you keep like jerking off, then you could shoot, like it could shoot. And it's like, all right, I'm gonna try that. But just the idea of like living a life where that is denied me, And Greg, you're a Catholic, so I know you're not supposed to be doing that stuff, Sarah.
Yeah, not at all. Not at
Not
all.
at
We don't
all.
do
Not
any of
supposed
that
to be
stuff.
doing that. We'll see you at confession.
There's a different set of rules for Catholic, so we do what we want and then just show up. It is interesting because I do consider myself a Catholic, just because that's the church I grew up in. That's the church I feel most comfortable in. But we talk about being more of a libertarian. I don't like the hierarchy of the church either. So it's like I'm kind of a Catholic in name only.
Got it. I met so many, so many Catholic anarchists in particular, and in our circles, in our community that we're in, that I always find that very interesting. Again, interesting people. You're like, wait a minute, what? How do you square this circle? But something that recently you shared a video that I produced with Free the People, and it's the first video in a comedy series I'm making called "Comedy is Murder," and the first video is misgendering a murderer, and I appreciate you sharing that video with I think it was a post Millennial, and all that, and just. I wish it was just a comedy sketch, but I got the idea for it from from an actual event of somebody who self-identifies as a woman and was also a murderer of women. So yeah, where are you on that? Where are you on that, Sarah?
Murder is bad.
Yeah, murder is pretty bad.
No, honestly, I love the skit, and actually Terry sent it to me to get my input a couple weeks before you guys released it. So I thought it was hilarious.
I didn't know that. Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to talk to Terry about that.
I was not supposed to say that.
No, Terry is there like with the thumb, like either up or down. Like Sarah, you're making the call, like Caesar, either up or down.
No, and well, I mean, I love the Kibbies too. I hung out with them back in. I did Matt's show when I was in DC in February, and me and Terry were on a panel last year at Freedom Fest, and so that's how I got in contact with them. But yeah, she sent it to me, and I was like, "This is gold. Like this is perfect because you're right. Like the way to highlight the absurdities that is happening right now is through comedy, and that was." It's so ridiculous. It's true. Like the fact of you playing a woman and what you're saying is hilarious. Thank
you.
You do love to wash your hair, right? I mean,
I do. Us girls. Well, there's something about the commentary on self ID, which I think is one of the many controversies around this. And how that's being played out, especially I think in the prison system. I thought it was only happening in Europe and England and all that, but apparently it's happening here where you have oftentimes violent criminals who rapists and who've assaulted and beaten people, and they are taking the route of self-identifying without having done the work, I guess.
Yeah.
And then being placed in women's prisons and, obviously putting women, women in harm's way. It's really wild.
Yeah. So what's, and this is, I mean, my solution has always kind of been, you create an LGBT ward of prisons. There's no reason to, especially prisons, somebody's already committed a crime to go to prisons, right? And so I've always said kind of have like an LGBT ward of prisons, but if you commit the most heinous crimes of murder, rape, anything like that, I really don't care. Put you in the men's prison. It's one of those things like you should be in a men's prison because you committed a very male-driven crime. And so I don't care. An LGBT ward should only really be for non-violent offenses. and violent offenses, you can have your day in prison with men.
Yeah, you would think it would be that way. Yeah, anyway, the idea of like, okay, we're going to house the violent with the violent and the nonviolent with the nonviolent. Fortunately, I haven't had any experience with the penal system, and if all things go well, I will never have that experience with it.
Well, then you just say, I mean, then it was just female semen.
Right. That's earlier you talked about fighting the ideology, an evil ideology, and what is that ideology? How would you describe?
Yeah, so I mean, I when I talk a lot about queer theory, and queer theory is, I mean, for most people that don't know, it's basically the CRT for the gay community, and it's based in postmodern neo-Marxist ideals. So they don't believe there's any such thing as absolute truth. They want to erase basically everything that you hold dear. They want to erase all the truths and then create this, one system. And neo-Marxism is kind of based in a two-class system. And so they want to put everybody down in this working class to work for the elites. And so they are trying to erase all of that. They're trying to, and probably the worst part about it is they are going after the children, and they are indoctrinating the children. They want to make it seem like if you're a parent, your kids don't belong to you; they belong to the state. And even Joe Biden recently said, like, there's no such thing as other people's kids; they're all our kids. I mean, that is Marxism. That is pulling, the kids are now not, that you don't have rights as parents to be able to make the choices in terms of schooling and all this other stuff that you should be able to make. And a lot of the states around, the country, they're even codifying that into law to where children can seek, gender affirming care or even abortions as young as age 10 without parental knowledge or consent.
Yeah, it is wild to have someone like Joe Biden talk about they're all our kids, where it's like, dude, I don't know, it's something, you got some fucked up kids, Joe. Like, and look, my boys are still young. I've heard it described as having kids is like an experiment that you don't get the results for at least 20 years. I'm doing the best that I can, but my God, I mean, if just thinking like if you raised a hunter, which I admit Hunter Biden sounds like a lot of fun. He sounds like a dude, you could definitely party with. But he's a wild man, wild artist.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, he might even go a little bit too far for me, in a lot of this stuff. So.
There was a comedian. I forget his name, but it was during the campaign where he had brought up Trump going after Joe Biden for all this stuff, and he's like, just talk about his son, man. Like, that's all you got to do is just talk about. It's like his son is sleeping with the widow with his brother's widow, and there's something about hiding a gun and all that. It's like why are you trying to dig up all this other shit? It's right there.
Yeah, it's right there. And then he's got pictures just smoking crack. So I mean, crack is whack. So
well, I always find it wild where it seems like Joe Biden is sort of the realization of so many things that people said Donald Trump was. So like, ask everybody and they'll swear that Donald Trump has said the N-word, and it's like, but there's no evidence whatsoever of Donald Trump saying the N-word. Mm-hmm. But we have Joe Biden saying the N-word like at a congressional hearing. Now, context, doesn't matter. Therefore, that works. And then, talking about like, Don Jr. is a cokehead. It's like, maybe he does coke. I don't know if we have, physical evidence of it, but then we got Hunter, like you said, smoking crack.
Yeah.
It's
or the nepotism. They always say that,
right.
Trump kids are only, it's nepotism, but then you have Hunter Biden on all these global deals and stuff like that on the board of Burisma and all this stuff. It's no, but actually talking about Joe Biden saying like the N-word, did you see his speech at Howard University this last weekend?
Only that clip, but yeah, can you tell me about it?
So the clip, he said white supremacy is the biggest terror threat to the country.
Right.
Well, actual radical Islamic terrorists are coming across our southern border. We actually found a Afghan soldier or Afghan who was on the FBI watch list, came across the southern border, was arrested this weekend as well.
Oh, wow.
And so, but he's saying white supremacy is the biggest terror threat to our nation. He also said that it was the Martin Luther King assassination that made him become a public defender after he graduated law school.
That doesn't sound right.
Maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, otherwise, why did you? I'm pretty sure he sponsored the '94 crime bill. So doesn't make much sense. But we all know, like, Joe Biden's a liar. He's trying to rewrite history. And again, that's the postmodern Marxist tell, is it's their history, it's their truth, it's not the truth.
I wonder if because he's been in this game, for a long time, and I would never think of him as like deliberately, pushing like that, ideology. But just his career alone just shows that he's pretty much doing a similar thing. I mean, whether it's charges of plagiarism or outright lying, all that stuff. I didn't see the speech that he gave, but did he tell all the black people in attendance if they didn't vote for him, they weren't black?
Oh no, it wasn't.
That would have been interesting. That would have been interesting if he had said that. Okay, no, who you voted for Trump? Okay, you're not black, even though you're attending a historically black college.
Well, it was interesting. The whole speech was about race. So it's at a historically black university, and all he's talking about is race. And honestly, if it's me, I'm feeling like he's literally come there to pander to me, because like, why are you talking about like my race, which is, again, has nothing to do with what my future is going to be, and only talking about that? It sounds like something that, a stump speech. He also claimed that it was Trump's Charlottesville speech that got him wanting to go, back into politics and run for office, which I don't know if that's true, but it seems kind of just a far-fetched idea that that's what made him run. We all know that he didn't decide to run. They ran him because he's old and senile, and they can control him.
Well, it is wild, having somebody who is the oldest white man, I think, living, talk about race at all at a historically black college or university. It's sort of like, he's in a way, it's like, no, like, you're the old guard, you're the old guard.
Like, you've been in Congress longer than I've been alive, so you I mean, and really, he also told them that racism will never go away, which,
oh, great. Nice.
Yeah,
that's good to know.
It's like job security. That's what they want.
Yeah, man. Dude, I need to figure out how to monetize that for sure. Sarah, thank you for speaking me. Thank you for speaking me. Thank you for talking to me so far. What we're going to do now is we're going to head over for a locals exclusive. So if you've enjoyed this conversation, head over to thelouperez.locals.com. I have some questions that came in for Sarah from my locals community, and definitely be sure to follow Sarah Higdon on YouTube, and check out her writing on human events and post-millennial.
And on Twitter at Sarah Higdon with an